Hi, this is Glenn Robitaille, and I would like to talk with you about the subject of coping with loss in times of crisis. I also want to begin by saying if you're feeling a little more vigilant these days and find that you're a little more cautious than you ordinarily are, that's completely normal. Anyone who isn't feeling some of that is probably presenting a bit of a risk to the rest of us. Denial is very common as a defense mechanism during times of higher stress. And while it's really good to take a vacation from reflecting and thinking about COVID-19, and I would suggest that we all do that, recognizing that this is a serious moment for all of us and making sure that we're doing our universal precautions and taking it as seriously as we need to do for each other is an important thing. So I would like to talk to you a bit about how to survive this in as healthy a manner as you can, recognizing that we're all experiencing some losses, and generally that's what causes us to need to ramp up our ability to cope, is a feeling of loss. In this case, we're probably feeling potential loss of our health. Perhaps people that we love are in high-risk categories, and that makes us very nervous. So when that happens, it's possible that we can let ourselves slip into a place where our optimism fails us. And optimism, as you may know, is basically the ability to look at the world in a positive manner, to see and expect the most favorable outcome, to believe that good is ultimately going to prevail. And all of those things are part of an optimistic view. And we have every reason to have optimism that eventually this is all going to resolve itself. Maybe we're struggling because in this present moment, we're not seeing enough evidence of that to make us comfortable today. And that's fair, that's reasonable. If I could reduce the idea of optimism down to one concept, is this idea of confidence amidst uncertainty. We always live with uncertainty. This just happens to be a time where that's accelerated a bit. But the reason it's important to have confidence is because our security stands on that. Our security stands on the ability to count on certain things. And so when people lose optimism, it can happen for several reasons. We all have expectations and beliefs, things that we count on in our life to keep us safe, principles and perhaps religious values and ideas and things like this that have kept us going and kept us motivated in our life and given us that sense of confidence. And we can afford to have beliefs that are somewhat idealistic until something happens that compromises our ability to hold on to that. I like to call it the brown bag principle. And we carry our beliefs in this fragile bag, and when the bottom becomes wet and the contents come flowing out, that's when our confidence is compromised. We could be feeling some disillusionment at a time like this. I know that I've heard a lot of criticism about not only our government, but governments around the world for failing to prepare for this in the way that they should. And even though some preparation was done, and it could have been anticipated, at least based on some of the early predictions by people like Bill Gates in 2005 in a TED Talk, and I know that George W. Bush presented a very aggressive and assertive plan for addressing a global pandemic of flu during his particular time as president of the US. But anyway, when those are unmet, we may be feeling disillusionment with our government, and perhaps even now, leaders are struggling to make the best choices for all of us around our organization, and maybe you're feeling some disillusionment with that as well. If you are, that's normal. Having expectations are part of the way that we frame our own security. But some people may be feeling demystified by this whole experience. And I'm going to talk about that a little more in a second. What I want to talk about now is what really constitutes a crisis. And if you look closely at what I'm about to present, there's not a lot of difference between what I'm describing as a crisis and what one experiences during trauma. This is no doubt a traumatic moment for many. And there's going to be some residual trauma that we'll have to work through for those who have significant losses when this is all done. But a crisis is when our normal expectations are challenged by an undeniable reality. When our normal ways of coping, the things we've counted on to help get us through difficult times, are no longer working, and so they're being severely tested. And when we feel that our solutions to the problems we're facing are unachievable or absent. But the key point around a crisis has less to do about what is happening than it does about what's happening in us. So when our inner resources are taxed beyond their depth and we're feeling that we can't cope, that's the true definition of a crisis. So when we're in crisis, we may experience numbness. Often we don't take the hit directly. The body and the mind has this capacity to not feel the full blow of that particular thing that we're working through. We may feel confusion. Again, if we've had certain confidences and those are being challenged and the things we expect would work aren't working, we may feel and experience some mental confusion. And then we can also experience derealization, and maybe you've experienced this before when you're not connecting well with the world around you. It feels like it's almost like a fog, like there's this filter between us and the world, so we're not feeling totally connected or grounded in the environment around us. So it feels very strange to us, and as if we're just really, we're in it, but we're not of it. Depersonalization is very similar to that, but rather than it being about the world around us, it's about what's going on in us. And perhaps you've experienced this as well in a time of grief. If you've experienced a significant grief event, or a time when you are experiencing particular fear around something, some of you may be experiencing it now. It's this idea where you're not connecting well with your own body. You're feeling like your own body is not really connected to you. It's like you're hovering above it, an observer of your own self. So when you look at derealization, it's like the world seems different, and with depersonalization, you seem different. And if you're experiencing some of that right now, that is to be expected. Again, these are some of the things that emerge when we're dealing with what would be a true crisis. And right now, I would say we're anticipating the possibility of that here in our own area. And often along with that comes this thing called demystification. And demystification is significant because it's the extreme end of this whole disillusionment continuum. Because with that, there's a stripping away of everything you held to be true and on which you counted for security. So when people are demystified, they may express disappointment with others that they counted on in their life that did not come through. People who are of a religious persuasion of one kind or another and have thought that God would behave or would perform in certain ways may have disillusionment there. And along with that then comes a collapse of one's confidence and in the coping strategies that you've embraced. So it's the brown bag on steroids is what it is. And when people go through this process of demystification, often a lot of God stuff comes up. You don't have to be a person who's actually a person of faith to be thinking about God at this time. Those who do have a faith will often question the wisdom, benevolence, or the interest or love of God. However, they've seen that in the past because they're not feeling it in the moment. It's been the experience of some that they lose their faith altogether. I know Charles Templeton, who was the Billy Graham of the British world at that time in Canada and the United Kingdom. At the same time Billy Graham was doing his thing, went to Bangladesh following a significant typhoon event that left a lot of decimation. And for him, that was a demystifying event, and he basically chucked his faith and spent the remainder of his life as the editor of Maclean's magazine, so you may know him from that. He had a cottage up in this area, got to meet him on a few occasions and talk to him about theology and those kinds of things. Very interesting guy. But skeptics, agnostics, and atheists also sometimes start thinking about God at times like this. They often get angry at people who believe in God and challenge them on where their God is in this particular moment. I've already experienced that a couple times in recent weeks. And then they may also experience some dismay at the vulnerability and uncontrollable aspects of life. And the feeling that comes with that, that there is no organizing principle, that we're kind of randomly sitting out here experiencing whatever the universe has for us at this given moment. But here are three perspectives you may hear in times of crisis. You may have heard these before. Some will say that everything has a purpose and that's a go-to thing for them. Don't get too concerned. There's a wisdom to events and the circumstances that happen. If we could actually see the point behind it, we wouldn't feel so badly because God's in control. And so our challenge is to learn to trust either God or whatever it is that we're counting on. I would say some people view science this way. And no matter what happens, science is the solution. They're going to figure it out. And we can hope for both of those things. Ultimately, we don't know. But Isaac Newton was an example of this. He said many years ago that trials are medicines which our gracious and wise physician prescribes because we need them. And he portions the frequency and the weight of them to what the case requires. Let us trust his skill and thank him for his prescription. So Sir Isaac Newton found that helpful. I'm sure many of you do as well. Believe that no matter what we're experiencing right now, there is a wisdom behind it, and it'll ultimately make sense at some point down the line. But others may talk about the idea that what comes to us is something that we have earned in some way. You hear this expressed scientifically. I've heard it recently as human beings to the cosmos are like parasites because we're taking from the earth and we're taking from the world and we're not giving back, and so we're poisoning the oceans and the air, and because of that, the earth is trying to spit us out, and that's why we have these pandemics like every 100 years. So I don't know if you've heard that. That's one explanation I've heard. Religiously, people talk about karma, that what we encounter in one existence is stuff that we've earned in another existence. And so those who talk about karma normally also talk about dharma, that there's a certain acceptance of the lot that we have in our life that is required in order to earn better karma. So you don't try to transcend it, you accept it, you embrace it, and you grow through it. And so for those who think this way, our challenge is to accept our lot. And so if you're thinking this is a growth experience for you, well, a lot of the world is thinking that way, so you're not alone. Black Elk, who's in the indigenous world a very revered personality, said that you've noticed that the truth comes into this world with two faces. One is sad with suffering and the other laughs. But it is the same face, laughing or weeping. When people are already in despair, maybe the laughing face is better for them. And when they feel too good and are too sure of being safe, maybe the weeping face is better for them to see. So according to Black Elk, there's good and there's bad and everything. It's really up to us to allow whatever is happening to bring to us that part of wisdom that maybe we're not as good at accepting as the other. Then finally, there are those who would say there's no deeper meaning to any of this. This is just happening. This happens randomly throughout time, and so we can't find anything philosophical in this. It's just happening. Bad things happen to good people. The rain falls on the just and the unjust. Nobody's getting targeted. And they may have the perspective that if it is to be, it is up to me. And again, I've reinforced a number of the things that I've sent out and written. It's a good psychological concept that we need to control that which we can control. And that anxiety lessens when we identify the controllable. And rather than spending too much time fussing about things that we can't control, actually deciding we're going to find those things that we can and do those things. So that the expression, if it is to be, it is up to me, rings true when it comes to controlling the things that you can control. And so our challenge, every one of us, is to take this experience that we're going through and integrate it in a way that builds our resilience and allows us to again feel hope and optimism. So when we're going through this time, let me suggest that if you're going through a demystification experience, this isn't the time to be rebuilding your confidences in the world. If it's possible, set that aside for now. Don't spend a lot of time doing work around your paradigms, because it's a distraction from the real work that is at hand, which is far more practical than that. And also, don't give up on the things that have been helpful to you in the past in times of crisis. So if you've been giving yourself to experiences like music, I like playing my guitar, maybe you go for walks, maybe you like to do art, whatever your way of addressing things, maybe drawing closer to your relationships in other ways on the phone, perhaps using Zoom, keeping up with the readings that you do, whatever's worked for you in the past, this isn't the time to give up on that. You may want to think about it again differently when this is over, but save that for when you have more energy. And thirdly, if you can't do that, if you're going to do work on the way that you have thought in your belief system because it just won't let you go, it's better to do that work out loud, to do it also with a non-defensive, non-directive listener. So that I really want to stress. You don't want to be doing this with a person who's going to give you a lot of advice or be critical of you and try to talk you out of what you're thinking. You want someone who's a good active listener who can reflect and maybe help you to clarify. But you want to do that work out loud because when you verbalize your thoughts and your feelings, they clarify. When you hear the sound of your own voice coming back through your own ears, and you see in the micro expressions of the person with whom you're speaking some feedback, sometimes you see things a little differently when they hit the light of day. I know that I have a lot of thoughts in my head that don't seem reasonable to me when they're up there, but when they get out and hit the real world, I'm able to see it more clearly. So focus on acknowledging your questions rather than finding answers. Questions are good. Questions always lead to solutions. There's not a single thing we've accomplished in this world as a race, as individuals, that didn't begin as some kind of a question that we attempted to resolve. And so focus on what those are, because new confidences don't come overnight. They take time to happen. If we're too confident too quickly, perhaps we're not giving it the kind of respect and diligence it requires. And also, it's okay to expect that something deeper is going to come from this. I mean, you're going to go through it anyway, one way or the other, and it's going to be what it is. But we do have a decision whether or not whatever happens completely takes away our joy in life and our optimism, or whether we're going to decide that we're going to own it and we're going to demand from it some gift. Because in every experience we have, there is something left behind that we can own and take with us that can help us in our lives. We just have to decide that's what we're going to do. So I would say doubt boldly, but doubt with confidence. If you hold fast to the expectation that whatever's happening in you right now, your faith or your thoughts, your ideas, anything, your confidences in life, however you've gained them, that they're changing rather than disintegrating, you'll build stronger, more realistic confidences. If you expect complete collapse of those things, that everything on which you stood on for security is gone, that's exactly what's going to happen. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So maintain a belief, demand growth from it, and we're more likely to have that occur. John Paul Richter said, and I think there's a good point here, I certainly have experienced this in my life, that there's a purity which only suffering can impart. The stream of life becomes snow white when it dashes against the rocks. Perhaps because it helps us to distinguish between the superfluous and the things that we thought were meaningful to us from the valuable, the things that truly are. Certainly, we're all figuring that out a bit in this time as well. So with that kind of as background, I'm going to try to use the remaining time to talk about 10 strategies for rebuilding the foundation of resilience. And so these are the 10 of them, and I'm going to go through them one by one. And hopefully one or two of those are going to stand out for you. I'm not expecting everybody to memorize my 10 points because there are lots of good points out there, and you could probably think of many that I've not included in this list. These are the ones that have been meaningful for me, but hopefully something in this list of 10 is going to tweak you in a way that's going to make you feel you have better preparation for dealing with some of these things. So I like to always begin in every situation I find myself, whatever that is, by asking, what is this moment about? I don't want to be casual about the moment. I want to see it for what it is. And so to do that, I like to say, take a step back. You know, our emotions are very powerful. Often when we lead with our emotions, it takes us to a place based on our perception rather than on reality. So I like to, rather than just react emotionally based on what I'm experiencing in the moment, take a step back and look at it and settle myself down a bit. Like maybe you use a breathing technique. I like Benson's relaxation therapy. I learned that years ago, and it's always been my kind of go-to breathing. People talk about square breathing. There are other types of breathing that are taught and utilized, particularly in mindfulness kinds of circles. And then I like to observe the birds. And I grabbed this image from Martin Luther, who was a theologian that founded the Lutheran Church. And at one point he said, you can't stop the birds from flying over your head, but you can stop them from making a nest in your hair. So I really like that image because a lot of thoughts and a lot of fears and a lot of emotion flies around at a time like this. And I have no control over those things. You know, emotion is what it is. We don't choose our emotions, we choose our actions. So feeling something, I don't have control over that. Allowing it to take a root in me, I do have some control over that. And so just observe the birds, know that they're there, but don't let them take a foothold in your life, or in this case, make a nest in your hair. And when you're taking that step back, rather than seeing the whole of it, try to find the heart of it. You know, what's the core emotion? What's the driving force behind whatever is going on? What is the most important thing? And then when you find that, identify your contribution and what is doable and do that thing. Secondly, when you're doing that, focus on one thing. I'm going to go back to this mindfulness idea again here. That's what mindfulness basically has, that principle of focusing on one thing. When I was in private practice and I was speaking with someone that I could see was becoming anxious, I would toss them a tennis ball and I would invite them to feel the texture of that ball and to squeeze it and feel, you know, how it gives and expands and you know, feel the temperature of it, the weight of it, all of these things. And when you focus on one thing, it does have a calming effect. Some of you may have received a smooth stone from me. When people have come to see me here at work and have talked about being anxious, I often give them a smooth stone they can carry in their pocket and suggest the same thing. When you're feeling that, pull out this stone, feel the weight, the temperature, the texture, draw your attention to that one thing. And so when you're focusing on that, harness your emotional energy. Try to get rid of all the extraneous stuff and focus in on your strength. And you do that by eliminating the distractions that are keeping you from being present in this particular moment. One mindfulness technique I'll throw in here that is helpful is one that I got from Thomas More, who wrote Care of the Soul. And he said when you've had a particularly tough day, he says when you go home, fill the sink and wash the dishes rather than loading the dishwasher. And as you're washing the dishes, you know, picture that the washing of the dishes is cleansing all of the bad stuff that you've experienced in that day. You're washing it away. And if you do that mindfully, it is powerful. I have done it myself on many occasions. I find it very healing. This one's a longer project, but I'd like to put it on the table for you to think about now. And that's the idea of understanding a reaction pattern. We all have them. We're all triggered by certain things. Not everyone is triggered by the same things, so we need to be self-aware. What are those things that trigger us and set us off? What are our vulnerabilities in a moment like this? I, for instance, can drive up behind another vehicle, and often, you know, coming into work, you'll probably relate to this. You got 20 cars ahead of you, and you're all going the same speed as the one that's first in line, even if that car is going slower than I generally would like to go. And I'm fine with that. What does annoy me, though, is if someone passes me to get ahead of me and then slows down. And then I have to work on it. So I know that's a trigger point for me. And, you know, I've got to be careful when that happens that I don't allow my reflex responses to take over and, you know, I forget who I am. So you need to understand those reflex responses. And when you know you have a vulnerability, you can plan in advance. When you experience this, this is what you're going to do. We talk about advanced care directives. That's what the ACD is. Those of you who work in long-term care who also have had some experience working with geriatrics and people who are closer to dying, they often will put together an advanced care directive so that people know what to do. Well, put one together for yourself so when this happens, you know what you're going to do, because when the emotion flows and your mind is taking a back seat to that, it's much easier to do the right thing if you've had a plan in advance. When this happens, this is what I'm going to do. I took this fourth principle of standing on your desk from the movie Dead Poets Society. I really love that movie. It's one of my top 10. I used the idea of standing on your desk, which Robin Williams, if you recall, had all of his students in his class go behind his desk and then step on his chair and then onto his desk and look at the classroom from a different angle. And all of life has opportunities for that. So I use it as a way to check the idea of being curious. Rather than reacting to it, be curious about it. Look at it, turn it around a bit, look at it from all angles. Maybe this experience here isn't what we would call a gem, but there are facets to it. I think that's the point. So try to look at the facets and generate other possibilities. I know in medicine, we're getting so many different suggestions around doing this and doing that. The most recent one I saw was from one of the frontline doctors that were working with COVID-19 in New York City. He was giving a breathing technique that is supposed to help a great deal if you're experiencing shortness of breath. He's generating another possibility. And also be open to being wrong. There's nothing wrong with being wrong. Everything that we've accomplished as a species has happened because we were wrong. Remember, we're the folks that once thought bloodletting was a good idea, and other than for hemochromatosis, it's probably not a healthy thing to do in any measure. But at one time, that was gold standard in medicine. So be open to being wrong. When you're wrong, it gets you closer to being right. And it's like Wayne Gretzky said, you don't score on 100% of the shots you don't take. So you're going to miss sometimes, but every so often you're going to hit it. So keep up with it. Fifthly, deal with the root, not the fruit. In other words, don't stay up in the visual expression of what we're seeing. Get down to the bottom of it. And I like to talk about the microscopic truth, which is something that Gay and Kathleen Hendricks discussed in their book, Conscious Loving. They actually talked about three things: the idea of feeling your feelings deeply so you know what they are, feel your feelings deeply, identify them, tell the microscopic truth, which is that which cannot be argued. So once you start getting into things that people can argue back with you about, you're not at the microscopic truth, you're at a perception. If I was to say, right now, I'm feeling a little hyperhidrosis, my palms are sweating, or when you said that, I felt tightness in my chest, or when you said that, my jaw clenched and became tense. Those are unarguable statements. They also reveal something about fear and anger if I happen to be experiencing those things. So telling the microscopic truth is a good way of connecting with those deeper core emotions. Recognize the story of your life. If I can go back to that earlier slide, the vulnerabilities that lead to the same things happening over and over and over again. Those are vicissitudes, or what they would call schema in schema-focused cognitive therapy. And we experience certain events, and because of that, we're more vulnerable to experiencing the same thing in same or similar events. People have often wondered why, when they go to a funeral for someone they barely knew, that suddenly they find themselves very emotional. Well, it's because grief doesn't go to various places in the brain. It's stored in one area. And so a new grief experience stands on the shoulders of previous grief experiences. And so you may be experiencing emotion from something that was much more significant for you than the one that you're experiencing now. That's a schema. It's something that is building on a past experience. And so then also know the things that set you off. Those are the things you want to deal with, catalysts, not the fruit. Immediate moment is one thing. Cause of the immediate moment is another. 6, take calculated risks. And I want to stress the idea of that risk being calculated. I'm not talking about being foolhardy and throwing caution to the wind. I'm talking about making progress by trusting yourself. And so the idea that we all have inner wisdom, the little voice in our head that tells us we're moving in the wrong direction. Marshall Linehan calls that the wise self in dialectical behavior therapy. The idea that there's this voice and that resonates with you, and you need to pay attention to that. It's not perfect. Just because the little voice in your head is telling you this is the right way to go doesn't mean that it always is, but it will get you closer to it than it would otherwise. And then also, if you're going to take a risk, you need to be good at the risk that you're taking. It's best to know that you do have some strength in that area to take that risk. And so I like to rely on what my encouragers are telling me. And if you look at why you're in healthcare as an example, or in the role that you are, I'll bet you can find people in your life who encouraged you along the way and told you this is something you ought to be doing, something you're good at. I know I can find that in my life. So listen to your encouragers. They'll help you to decide what is a good risk to take in this moment. Seventh, schedule time for fussing. You're a human being, just like me. You're going to fuss. Anyone who's not fussing right now a bit just isn't paying attention. There's good reason for us to be concerned, but we don't need to be fussing all day long. We need to be giving ourselves a break from that. You know, we don't have to be watching the news all day long. We can watch other things. We can set it aside and enjoy our life a bit. That's perfectly natural and normal. The problem is if you don't give yourself time to actually do that fussing, it's going to keep sneaking back on you. So I actually, in the past, if something's been bothering me, I'll schedule it right into my calendar so that I have time to do it, so that I can put it to the side and give it attention later on. Gestalt therapy is based on the idea of unfinished business. And what happens if you don't fuss things through is that you leave a lot of unfinished business behind that can create a lot of schema. So we don't want that. So give yourself time to fuss. Maybe set aside a half hour to think through all of the questions and the fears that you may be having. And when you're done with that, set it aside and tell yourself you're going to pick it up at this time. And while we're on that subject, this is about controlling what you can control. I can control the amount of time I'm fussing if I give myself permission to do that. But in every circumstance around this, we can decide that we're going to find in that our contribution so we can control that which is available to us for controlling. Eighth, make sure that the way you're talking to yourself during this time is not negative, that you're actually building yourself up, that you're focusing on the positive, because you want to be confident, and words have power. If you're always saying negative things and you're always talking about the catastrophe around us, and if you're not talking about your own inner strength and the things that you can control, you're not going to create momentum that you need to be able to carry this through emotionally for the long haul. And we could be in for a bit of a long haul. And so while I'm on that subject, let me remind you that even if it is a long haul, it's still lived one day at a time, and each day is lived one moment at a time. So let's try to focus on the present and to control what we can in this moment. There's a poem I read some years ago that said, two men looked out from their prison bars. One saw mud and the other saw stars. Well, we're all looking out the same window. Some people are looking up and some people are looking down. And your experience of this is going to be directly related to the vector your eyes take. So I would encourage us all to look more to the stars in this and remain optimistic to the best that we can and build our resilience through affirming our confidence. Ninth, I'm saying find the hope here. Find the ray of light. You know, be positive. We have to expect to overcome. We're not going to have victory without some setbacks. We know that. But expect that we're going to overcome this. And also accept ambiguity. Ambiguity is not a bad thing. It's been an enriching factor in my life. So I like to say, let the ambiguity enrich the moment. Not knowing everything allows us the opportunity to think and to find other solutions and to problem solve. You know, that's what we're here for. That's what human beings do. We don't just succumb to our problems, we overcome them by accepting the ambiguity and challenging them. So have a goal for yourself every day to find the optimism, to expect to overcome and to be positive. One of the ways I do this, and some of you who know me will know that if you ask me how I'm doing in the morning, I will tell you that I'm doing okay. If you ask me how I'm doing in the afternoon, I will tell you that I'm doing okay. If you ask me how I'm doing in the evening, I will tell you that I'm doing okay. If you ask me how I'm doing in the morning, I will tell you that I'm doing okay. If you ask me how I'm doing in the afternoon, I will tell you that I'm doing okay. If you ask me how I'm doing in the evening, I will tell you that I'm doing okay. If you ask me how I'm doing in the morning, I will tell you that I'm doing okay. If you ask me how I'm doing in the afternoon, I will tell you that I'm doing okay. If you ask me how I'm doing in the evening, I will tell you that I'm doing okay. If you ask me how I'm doing in the morning, I will tell you that I'm doing okay. If you ask me how I'm doing in the afternoon, I will tell you that I'm doing okay. If you ask me how I'm doing in the evening, I will tell you that I'm doing okay. If you ask me how I'm doing in the morning, I will tell you that I'm doing okay. If you ask me how I'm doing in the afternoon, I will tell you I'll generally tell you something as extravagant as perfect or excellent or wonderful. And I got that habit 20 years ago when a man that I used to have breakfast with once a week would do that to me. And his wife was going through an experience of breast cancer and just had a double mastectomy. And when I would ask him how he was doing, he'd always say wonderful. That was his chosen word. And I said, why are you saying you're wonderful when I know that there's a lot going on in your life? You can talk with me, you can be honest. And he said, well, I'm going to go to work after this breakfast, and before lunch, about 30 people are going to ask me how I'm doing, and every time I'm going to say wonderful. He says, you know what? By lunchtime, I'm going to feel wonderful. So call it if you don't feel it, fake it, or fake it till you make it. Lots of ways people describe that. I'm encouraging you to do that. And that's not being ingenuous. That's expecting to overcome and planting the seeds for later success. Finally, this doesn't work for everyone, and not everyone likes the suggestion. This works for me, so I'm offering it to you for consideration. I call it objectifying the pain. Again, emotion likes to take the reins of its own sleigh and go forward without being checked. I want to move back into my mind a bit and be rational. And so when I'm experiencing emotions that are negative, and I will often use this when people are in a situational depression. It doesn't work as well if someone is clinically depressed and their brain chemistry is now compromised and it's working against them. But when you're dealing with a situation that's causing you to feel deep sadness or mild depression, I will step back from it and say it's just emotion. Emotion doesn't kill anyone. It's a feeling. It's transient. You feel good, you feel bad. This is just a moment in time. So don't dignify that and give it more power than it deserves. Call it for what it is. This is a bad mood. It's just emotion. It's fear, or whatever the case may be. And take a dialectical approach with it. We all know that according to Kant, or Hegel, pardon me, the dialectical formula is thesis, counterthesis, and synthesis. So say the one, give its counter-argument, and find in the middle the balanced perspective that allows you to take it forward. And I'm going to take us right back to slide 1 and say, what is this? Ask what this is. So you can find the center and move from there. I just want to say one more word about controlling that which we can't control. You may have heard of Epictetus, a first century Greek Stoic philosopher. And this is what he said nearly 2,000 years ago. He said, there's only one way to happiness, and that is to cease worrying about things which are beyond the power of our wills. Or, don't worry about things you can't control. Find the things that you can't control and focus on those things. So these are a few of the thoughts that have worked for me. I hope they're helpful to you. As you have heard, members of the Traumatic Incident Support Team and the Spiritual Care Team are available to support you if you have need. Thank you for all that you're doing. And I hope that you and your family remain strong and healthy. Thank you.